In 330 BCE, Alexander the Great seized the treasuries of Persepolis. Inside, he found something that should have been impossible. 120,000 talents of gold and silver, minted coins, standardized weight, perfect purity. The Daric, a currency so trusted that merchants from Athens to the Indus River accepted it without question. For 2 centuries, the Persian Empire had operated the most sophisticated monetary system the world had ever seen. It didn't collapse because the currency failed. It collapsed with the currency intact. The Daric was still good, the coins were still pure, trade networks still functioned, but the empire that issued them, gone. This is what late-cycle monetary dominance looks like. Not weakness in the currency itself, but a silent structural dependency that only becomes visible when tested. The Persians had built something extraordinary, a system so effective it became irreplaceable, so stable it discouraged adaptation, and when the pressure came, the currency held. The empire did not. Because the danger wasn't in the coin, it was underneath it. If this walk through financial history sharpened how you understand risk, take a moment to like the video. It quietly tells the system this work has value. Now, why does a functioning currency outlast the power that created it? Picture the Eastern Mediterranean in 520 BCE. No universal medium of exchange, no standardized weights. Trade between regions required trust networks, physical inspection, private assayers. Every transaction carried counterparty risk. Then, Darius the Fur introduced the Daric, fixed weight, guaranteed purity, backed by imperial authority, accepted from Egypt to Bactria without conversion. It wasn't just a coin, it was infrastructure. The Daric reduced friction, enabled long-distance commerce, created predictability in a volatile world. At the time, this looked stable. What no one questioned was the structure holding it up. Darius inherited an empire stretched across 3 continents. Satrapies governed independently. Tax collection was inconsistent. Military funding was fragmented. The empire's reach exceeded its administrative grip. The Daric was the solution. A monetary standard meant centralized fiscal control. Provinces paid taxes in standardized currency. The imperial treasury could fund campaigns without negotiating barter arrangements with regional governors. This was not vanity, it was survival. The Daric allowed Persia to maintain standing armies far from home, to project power into Greece, to hold fractious territories together through economic integration rather than constant military occupation. The assumption was simple. If we control the money, we control the system, and for 200 years they did. The Daric became the reserve currency of the ancient world. Not because it was imposed, because it was useful. Merchants preferred it, kingdoms hoarded it. Even Greek city-states, perpetually at war with Persia, accepted Darics without hesitation. But there was a trade-off buried in that success. Monetary dominance created dependency, not just for those who used the Daric, but for Persia itself. The empire's fiscal model assumed continuous inflows, tribute from satrapies, spoils from expansion, tax revenue from trade routes. The currency worked, but only under conditions that would not last. The Daric system delivered exactly what it promised. By the reign of Xerxes, Persia commanded the largest treasury in the known world. The royal road connected Sardis to Susa, 600 miles of standardized coinage flowing through imperial checkpoints. Trade flourished, satrapies stabilized. The empire's logistical capacity was unmatched. But each success reinforced the same structure. As the Daric became universal, alternatives disappeared. Regional currencies faded, local barter systems atrophied. The entire economic architecture of the empire aligned around a single monetary standard. This was efficient. It was also brittle. Persia's military power depended on mercenary armies, paid in Darics. Its administrative reach depended on satrapal loyalty, maintained through Daric-denominated subsidies. Its territorial cohesion depended on trade networks, lubricated by Daric liquidity. Every layer of imperial strength was denominated in the same currency, and that currency depended on the empire's ability to keep expanding. Because the Daric wasn't just a store of value, it was a tool of imperial finance. The empire minted coins to fund wars. Wars generated tribute. Tribute replenished the treasury. The cycle worked, as long as the cycle continued. By the time of Artaxerxes III, Persia controlled the largest monetary economy in history. The Daric circulated from Macedon to the Hindu Kush. But the plumbing had tightened. The empire's fiscal flexibility, its ability to pivot, to endure a revenue shock, to survive without continuous expansion, had quietly eroded. Prices improved. The system delivered. Confidence was absolute. The stronger it became, the harder it was to stop. The warning signs appeared slowly. In 401 BCE, Cyrus the Younger hired 10,000 Greek mercenaries, paid in Darics, to march on Babylon. The coup failed. But the mercenaries made it home, carrying knowledge Persia would have preferred to keep internal. Greek commanders realized something unsettling. Persian armies weren't invincible. They were funded. Persia's military strength wasn't organizational superiority. It was monetary depth. Hire enough soldiers. Pay them reliably. Outlast the enemy. That worked until someone matched the funding. By the 350s BCE, revolts flared across the empire. Egypt broke away. Phoenician cities rebelled. Satraps in Asia Minor began hoarding Darics instead of remitting them to Susa. The currency still functioned, but the flow reversed. Persia's fiscal model assumed inflows from the periphery to the center. Now the periphery was retaining capital. The center was drawing down reserves to suppress revolts. The treasury remained enormous, but it was no longer growing. Do the math with me. If an empire's power depends on continuous monetary expansion, and that expansion stops, what happens to the power? Not immediately. That's the problem. The Daric held its value. Trade continued. The system looked intact. Nothing collapsed. And that was the problem. In 336 BCE, Philip II of Macedon was assassinated. His son, Alexander, inherited a battle-tested army and a strategic opening. Persia, under Darius III, still commanded the largest treasury in the world, still issued the dominant currency, still controlled the richest trade routes, but the structure beneath that wealth had calcified. When Alexander crossed into Asia Minor, Persia responded with what had always worked: hired mercenaries, Greek hoplites, paid in Darics. The currency was good, the soldiers were experienced, but Alexander's army wasn't fighting for pay. It was fighting for conquest, and conquest generates its own funding. At Issus in 333 BCE, Alexander captured the Persian royal baggage train. Gold, silver, and minted Darics, enough to fund his entire campaign. At Gaugamela in 331 BCE, he shattered Darius III's final field army. Persia didn't lose because its currency failed. It lost because its entire system, military, fiscal, administrative, was denominated in a monetary structure that assumed the empire's permanence. When that assumption broke, there was no fallback. Alexander didn't destroy the Daric. He adopted it. He used Persian mints, paid his soldiers in Darics, kept the currency circulating, because the currency was never the weakness. It was the dependency it created. From this point on, the outcome was no longer optional. When Alexander died in 323 BCE, his empire fractured. But the Daric standard didn't disappear. It evolved. The Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemaic Kingdom, even independent Greek city-states, all continued minting coins based on Persian weight standards. The monetary infrastructure Persia built outlasted the political structure by centuries. Power shifted, but the plumbing remained. The satrapies that once sent tribute to Susa now hoarded wealth locally. The trade routes that enriched Persepolis now enriched Alexandria. The mercenaries who fought for Persian gold now fought for Macedonian silver. But they were still paid in standardized coinage, still operating within a system Persia designed. This is what late-cycle monetary dominance looks like in retrospect. The structure persists. The issuer does not. Persia's mistake wasn't creating a successful currency. It was building an empire that couldn't survive without continuously expanding the system that currency enabled. The fiscal model assumed perpetual inflows. The military model assumed perpetual funding. The administrative model assumed perpetual compliance. When one assumption failed, the entire structure lost flexibility. The cost wasn't borne by the currency, it was borne by the people who depended on the system the currency supported. If you value analysis that treats financial history seriously, subscribing the channel simply ensures you don't miss work like this. This pattern doesn't require ancient empires. It requires a dominant monetary system, structural dependency, and the assumption that what has always worked will continue working. The Daric framework applies whenever a currency becomes infrastructure. When an entire economy aligns around a single monetary standard, efficiency increases, but so does fragility. Not in the currency itself, in the institutions that depend on it. Modern reserve currencies operate under similar assumptions: continuous inflows, perpetual liquidity, structural flexibility that exists until it's tested. Prices are the headline. Plumbing is the story. A currency can remain strong while the system it supports becomes rigid. Late-cycle monetary dominance often looks like strength. Stable exchange rates, deep liquidity, universal acceptance. But underneath, flexibility erodes. Persia's treasury was full when Alexander arrived. The Daric was still trusted. The system still functioned. It just couldn't adapt. History doesn't repeat events. It repeats incentives. When a monetary system delivers consistent results, institutions stop questioning it. Alternatives atrophy. Backup plans disappear. The entire structure becomes optimized for conditions that are assumed to be permanent. And when those conditions change, not collapse, just change, the adjustment is structural. This isn't about predicting crashes. It's about understanding dependency. The Daric teaches a simple lesson. Dominance and durability are not the same thing. A currency can be strong, trusted, universally accepted, and still be part of a system that has lost the ability to pivot. Late cycle thinking isn't about fear. It's about posture, not what will happen, but what you're positioned for if assumptions shift. Persia's fiscal model worked for 2 centuries, until it didn't. And when it didn't, there was no gradual adjustment, just transfer. The question isn't whether a system is strong, it's whether the strength is structural or more simply uninterrupted. 2 things to take from this. First, systems. A successful monetary standard creates dependency in both directions. The empire depends on the currency. The currency depends on the empire's ability to sustain the conditions that made it useful. When those conditions change, even a strong currency can't compensate for structural rigidity. Second, behavior. Late cycle confidence looks identical to early cycle confidence. The difference is flexibility. In early cycles, success creates options. In late cycles, success eliminates them. Persia's treasury was full when it fell. The Daric was still good. The empire was still powerful, but it had become something else, not adaptive, dependent. And dependency in a changing world is a structural risk no amount of monetary strength can offset. The Daric survived. The empire did not. That's not a prediction. It's a framework. If this helped you see the system more clearly, consider liking the video and subscribing the channel, not for predictions, but for perspective.